When I was a student some years ago now at Southeastern Seminary, there was a preaching professor down there by the name of Chavis Horn, and Dr. Horn was an adjunct faculty member at Southeastern. He was, for many, many years, the pastor at First Baptist Church in Martinsville. And so in his retirement, he taught kind of part-time at Southeastern, and he would teach, he taught the preaching classes down there. And whenever I would hear him speak in chapel service, invariably he would always say about whatever particular passage he was getting ready to preach on, he would say, "This passage is just lifting its hands, begging to be preached." Well, John chapter 4 in my book is one such passage. It's about the woman at the well. And that scene is so full of content that you can come at that scene from a variety of angles and pull from it so much. It is lifting its hands, begging to be preached. So this morning I want to look at that passage. I want to maybe come at it from a little different angle than maybe what we're used to. And so in John chapter 4, it says, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" And then the gospel writer has given us a little comment there that Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. In fact, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." Woman, Jesus replied, "Believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. That a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know that Messiah called Christ is coming, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I, the one who am speaking to you, I am he." And then we skip a few verses ahead. The woman had gone back to her village, and it says many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. "He told me everything I ever did." So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged Jesus to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. You know, again, if you just let that passage wash over you, there's so much that that one could dig out from that passage and use for a sermon. But this morning, I want us to think about the shadows we cast, and by that I mean the influence that we have. That's kind of the angle I want to come at this very familiar story this morning. And when you and I think about the shadows we cast, when we think about the influence that we have, we really can kind of think about that in 3 very broad categories. One is that you and I cast a shadow by proximity. In other words, we're just almost automatically going to have an influence on those that we are in close proximity to. So whoever is in your home, you're going to have an influence over. Whether it's children, whether it's a spouse, but you all are in close proximity, and so it's automatic that you're going to cast a shadow on them. You're going to have an influence. The second area is strategically. In other words, these aren't folks that we happen to work with on a regular basis or that we have in our home, but these are relationships, friendships that we seek out. That again aren't folks that are in proximity to us, but they're strategic. They're folks that we are in relationship with because we have intentionally established that relationship. And then the third area where we cast a shadow, or what I'll just call the kind of accidental casting of shadows. And these are folks that, for example, when you're in the checkout line at Walmart or Kroger, you're going to encounter the cashier. And you're going to have an influence. And I don't know about you, but sometimes the accidental shadows are the ones that can, sometimes I know in my own life, like really make your day. Someone that you really don't know does or says something unexpected is really encouraging and, kind of puts a little extra oomph in the step that day. Or it can have the opposite effect. It can really kind of almost ruin your day. But we have proximity, we have influence strategically, and then sometimes we're just going to have influence accidentally. Folks that we just encounter for whatever reason just during the course of the day. One planned, they're not a part of our work group or in our classroom or in our home or in our family, but our lives, our paths intersect. I want you to know this morning that in John chapter 4, Jesus' encounter with the Samaritan woman is a strategic encounter. She may have thought it was accidental, but it is strategic. Jesus goes there with intentionality. And because Jesus is God, he knows who he's going to meet there. And so he is strategically going to cast his shadow. He is going to strategically influence beyond anything this woman could have ever imagined her life. So this is a strategic encounter by Jesus with the woman at the well. So there are two quick things I want to say about the shadows that we cast, the influence that we impact or affect upon other people, and then we're going to kind of look at the passage in more detail. First of all, our shadows have influence whether we want it or not. You and I have influence whether we want it or not, and particularly for those that are in proximity to us. And just the simple attitude that you have when you're in the line at Walmart is going to, whether you want it or not, that's going to have an impact that day. Who you sit beside on an airplane is going to have an impact that day. And so we need to understand that the influence, the shadows that we cast are going to impact whether we want them to or not. And we need to be cognizant of that and to be sensitive to that and to know that and thus live a day and interact with folks with an awareness that the attitude we have, the spirit we bring, is going to affect them. And the second thing we'll say about shadows is our shadows are always consistent with our life. And this is so true, particularly with those first two categories of being in proximity or the strategic relationships that we have. Our shadows are always going to be consistent with our life. Shadows are a reflection, not a projection. I want you to think for just a moment, we've thought about this before on a Sunday morning, about social media. Social media, you have a complete filter, right? You have a Facebook page, you can choose what you put on your Facebook page. And so you put a few highlight reels of your vacation, or maybe your kids did something that you're really proud of, and so you post that. But Facebook, you have a filter. You can be selective about what you post and the pictures you share and the messages that you send. You've got a filter there. That's projection. That's projection. Our influence and our shadows, however, ultimately the real us is going to come out. Who we really are is going to eventually come through. And that's why I say that our shadows, our reflection, or our influence is always going to be a reflection and not a projection. And here in John chapter 4, we see this in play, right? The woman comes and there she is with Jesus, and they have a discussion, and at some point in that discussion, as we read, Jesus says to her, hey, go back and call your husband, and she says, I don't have a husband. And he says, in fact, you've had five husbands, and now man number 6 is not your husband. And that's when this passage really gets legs. Because it becomes the point in this woman's experience and in her encounter with Jesus that she comes to an understanding that Jesus really knows the real me. And when you and I come to that moment and with that realization with God, that I don't project to God. I don't filter myself to God. I don't just give to God the highlight reels. God knows who I really am. He knows who and what I truly am. When we come to that realization, when that happens, when that settles deep within us, that's when our walk with God is going to get really good. Because that is the moment that when you and I become open to God being in our lives and working in our lives, and Him knowing us, and we desiring then to know Him. So those are 2 quick things about our influence, about the shadows we cast. We're going to have influence whether we like it or not, and ultimately the real us is going to come through. So let me then take this passage and drill down a little deeper in this and say these next 3 things, because I think it's important that you and I take away from this passage thinking about our own shadows, our own influence. Impactful shadows come from what is God's ongoing work in our lives. Impactful shadows come from God's ongoing work in our lives. And you know what? As believers, we just need to claim that. That the greatest impact you and I can have upon another person is when we allow what God is doing and working in and through our lives to be front and center of our shadow that we cast, to be front and center of the influence that we have. Now, I want you to think about this lady here in John chapter 4. If you're familiar with this passage, you know exactly where I'm going with this. She's there when? When she thinks nobody else is going to be there. The general practice of that day and time was that people didn't go to the well in the heat of the afternoon. They went in the cool of the morning, and so that's probably when all the other women of her village went to the well to get water. And this is probably going to sound really sexist. Y'all just forgive me for this, okay? But all those women gathering around the well, there was a lot of conversation that was going on, right? There was a lot of, hey, how you doing? And, all that conversation that's going on. She didn't want to be there. Why? Because she knew a lot of that idle conversation was probably going to be a little bit about her, based on what Jesus has said about her. So she is isolated when she comes to the well and has this encounter, this experience with God in Christ. But look what happens after that encounter, after that experience. She goes back to the village, and she is totally into not being isolated, not being hidden, not being unknown, not slinking back into her house, unseen. But now she's out front and center because what? Jesus has cast His shadow upon her. And she has the Word of God in her, and that is now the shadow which she is casting upon that village. And that's a takeaway. that when you and I know God working in our lives, that's front and center then of the influence that we have and of the shadow that we cast. I mean, that becomes so transformative. It turns this lady around. It turns this lady around. And so as believers, we need to, again, claim that. And we need to own that the greatest impact that you and I can ever have is just like this woman in John 4 upon her village, and that is sharing what God is doing in us with another person and sharing that impact He is having in our lives with another. That's the most impactful influence you and I can have. Second thing is our greatest impact does not come from access to many, but to a few. And that is so counterintuitive. That is so counterintuitive. Jesus lived that out so much. You know, did Jesus speak with the crowds? Of course he did. You know, Jesus on occasion would draw a crowd and he would do some teaching, or he might do a miracle, or he might perform a sign in front of the crowd. But Jesus's most impactful moments came not with the many, but with the few. I mean, Jesus, if he wanted to, he could have gone into the Samaritan village. But instead, he chooses that day to spend that afternoon with one person. One person. Just like that time in the gospel when Jesus is he's got a great throng of people. They're kind of parading through the village, and there is Zacchaeus. And what does he say? Zacchaeus, I want you to come down. I'm going to have dinner with you tonight. He could have rented out the banquet hall in that village if he wanted to and been with the many, but instead Jesus said, you know what? I want to eat with you tonight. Here, I'm just reminded of how naive and silly I can be. You know what? If I were Jesus' marketing manager, I'd have done this so different and it would have been a complete mess. Right? I would have said to Jesus, hey, Jesus, if we really want to have an impact, now look, we're going to go to Louisville, Kentucky on Monday, and I have rented out the Coliseum, and we're going to have like a few loaves and fishes up there, and you're just going to multiply them, and we're just going to do some amazing things, and the people are just going to be wowed, it's going to be awesome. And we're just going to go Coliseum, auditorium, crowd, throngs, the many. You and I's greatest impact is not access to the many. It's access to a few. In the Gospel of John, after Jesus resurrects from the dead, again, if I'd been the marketing manager, we'd have hit Rome, we'd have hit Ephesus, we'd have been to Corinth, we'd have gone through Galatia. I mean, here's the resurrected Jesus. Let's get him out front and center. Let's go to the Colosseums. Let's go to the auditoriums. Let's pack it out. What does Jesus do, according to the Gospel of John, after his resurrection? He appears to Mary Magdalene. He then appears to the 12 disciples. He then takes care of Thomas. And then it ends with him restoring Peter. And so I want you and I to be mindful of the fact that when it comes to casting a shadow, it's not being accessible to the many. It's exerting our influence on the few. And that's where we can make tremendous impact. That's what Jesus did. That's what Jesus did. And then we leave with this thought. And I mentioned this from time to time on Sunday mornings. You know, we have divine appointments. We have these appointments that God has already orchestrated, and we may think they're accidental, but they're really strategic. We have the divine appointments. Divine appointments can be not just an appointment, but can be our divine assignment. And so this woman is not just a divine appointment for Jesus that day, but she is his divine assignment. And as a result of what he does in her life, and the shadow that he casts upon her, and the influence that he exercises, she then takes that experience, she then goes into her village, and she is the one that tells the story, that shares the testimony, that then gets the village to then come to Jesus. He spends 2 days with them, and amazing things begin to happen. But She is his divine assignment. I want you to think this morning about who is your divine assignment. Who is it that you can cast your shadow upon about what God is doing in your life? Who is the woman at your well? I want to close with this illustration. A couple of weeks ago, I was watching the PBS NewsHour, and on occasion, at the end of that program, they'll have somebody that will kind of tell their biography. They'll just kind of share their bio. And sometimes it's like somebody really famous. Could be an actor or a musician or a sports celebrity. And sometimes it's people I have no idea who they are. Probably more comment on me than them, but, you know, so the non-celebrities. But they'll tell a little piece of their story and about their life and kind of, you know, how the trajectory of their life or their career changed and what made that happen. And so it's always kind of an interesting thing. A couple of weeks ago, they had this Asian lady on. Her first name was Kim. And for any of you all, you certainly wouldn't recognize her name, but for any of you all that are familiar with American history, you know that there was this kind of iconic photograph that was taken during the Vietnam War. It was taken in 1972. And the photograph shows a few villagers running down the road because their village had been napalmed. And in the center of that image is a 9-year-old girl whose clothes have been burned off and whose skin has been scorched. And her hands are up and she's crying. I almost thought about showing that photo on the screen, but it's a disturbing image. It won the Pulitzer Prize that year. That is Kim. That is Kim. So here was this lady, now an adult, who was the 9-year-old girl in 1972 in that photo. So she shared that in a 12-month period, in the immediate aftermath of that event, she went through 14 surgeries, skin grafts. 14 surgeries. They helped a little bit, but they really didn't work. And so at the age of 19, it's now 1982, and Kim said she is so much in pain and can't really move, doesn't have the mobility that we would consider normal. She said, I just wanted to die. She said, I just wanted to commit suicide. And there was a doctor in Finland that performed in that year a new kind of surgery of skin graft on her, and it finally alleviated the pain and gave her some mobility. She goes and goes to college. She's a citizen of Vietnam. She goes to Cuba to study medicine. While in Cuba, she meets a young man. They are married, and they are flying back to Vietnam one day, and the plane refuels in Newfoundland. And during the refueling, she and her husband get off the plane and ask for asylum in Canada. And so today, she is a Canadian citizen. Now, that's part of her story. It's pretty gripping, just that. But that's not the story. Because what I heard on PBS that night just absolutely blew me away. This woman launched into a testimony. And her testimony was all about how she became a Christian. And what her faith in Jesus Christ has meant to her and done for her. And so for all of those other elements, the epicenter of her identity, the epicenter of her shadow that she is casting is Jesus. While she was in Vietnam, and because it was a communist country, there were no churches, she managed to get a copy of the New Testament. And with that copy of the New Testament, she met a Christian who began to disciple her. In other words, he cast his shadow into Kim, into her life, and began to share with her the work of God in his life. She was the woman at his well. in that moment in time. And so I want to just read to you a 2-sentence statement that she said that night in her little PBS bio. This is what she said. She said, "My faith in Jesus Christ is what has enabled me to forgive." Napalm is powerful, but faith, forgiveness, and love are more powerful.
Amen.
Saw that, I Googled her. She's all over the planet with her testimony. And she started a foundation